Some more Isaiah today, and this is going to take us a little while to get through this one because it is a big old book and there's a lot in it and a lot going on. This is chapters 15 to 20 we're doing today, and we've a complete change of tone from what we were looking at in the previous video. We now have we open with the prophecy of the destruction of Moab. I wrote down here that I've noted this just in case it becomes relevant later, but of course don't think there's any Moabites anymore, so obviously that does happen at some stage. But this section then goes on to predict a lot of the demise of a lot of societies. It does very helpfully note, however, that the Moabites' crime is pride, arrogance, conceit and insolence. So, yeah, I mean, it's difficult when all the Joshua are going into the promised land and kicking everyone's butt. There's not a great deal said about what they did wrong. There's enough to know that there was some serious problems. But it does really help, I think, with the context to have some sort of clarity on what it is that actually these people were doing wrong. It does get very specific on this one, though. It talks about Moab will be gone in 3 years. And given the timeline, it seems vaguely possible it could be about right, but it's obviously difficult to tell. I don't think tell precisely. I don't think we particularly care, because, I don't think the Moabites mattered that much in this. I know Moabites were people too, but, in the context of what we're trying to work out here, it doesn't seem to matter a great deal, other than perhaps to try and assess the accuracy of Isaiah's predictions. But, there's only so far we can go with that. He then prophesies the demise of Damascus, which, well, it's still there, isn't it? So, I suppose Jerusalem has been trashed however many times over the years and is still there. So I guess the prediction could still be true and Damascus would still be there. So that seems vaguely fair. Again, I guess the Assyrians are turning up shortly, so that would make sense. It prophesies that some sort of thing about Cush, which I had to Google. Cush seems to be broadly Ethiopia. He says some overlap between Cush and Ethiopia anyway. So Cush, as far as I'm concerned, we're talking about Ethiopia. But it talks about a people who are smooth-skinned and tall, aggressive nation of strange speech. Yeah, great. Okay, fine. In the context of the Bible, that just makes perfect sense that such a random thing would be said. I guess a lot of this stuff clearly refers to stuff of its time that's just, I have no context to deal with anyway, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. There's also prophecy against Egypt, and it talks about a civil war and external oppression. I googled this, and it seems to be generally agreed that this has partly come true, but there's a bit still to come, because it talks about a day where Egypt, Assyria and Israel will become a blessing upon the earth and all who follow God. It's interesting in a Christian context, that, isn't it? Because you've got those three. You've got Assyrians apparently still exist and are broadly Christian, so okay, well done there. We've got Israel, which is broadly Judaism, so not doing that. And we've got Egypt, which is broadly Muslim, so you've got one in each camp, I guess, from that. So, although I guess you could argue that all three of those follow the God of Abraham, they just disagree what happened 1,000 years later in terms of what he actually wanted from them. But it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Certainly Israel and Egypt are not places you would think as obvious places to be the source of a blessing on earth. There's a lot of troubles going on. So to some extent, certainly that's still a prediction that is yet to come true. We then get really weird, where Isaiah is told by God to strip off his clothes and go around and do his work in the buff for 3 years. So, yeah, and it's said that this is some sort of sign and warning to Egypt and Cush that the Assyrians are going to come along and take captives from Egypt and Cush/Ethiopia and lead them away with their bottoms bare. It says buttocks, not bottoms in here, to be fair. And this is to be to Egypt's shame. The shame, presumably, is not about bottoms being visible, but because of the reason it's happened is because of Egypt having done stuff wrong. Something like that. And we haven't seen much about what Egypt is like since the Exodus, so that was obviously some time ago. But on the basis that Egypt had lots of gods, none of whom were the actual God, presumably that's what that's all about. I've been tempted to mutter in the past about how it's sort of almost unfair. I'm not like whinge about fairness, but the idea that these days you don't see anything of God doing stuff, and then back in biblical times, there's plagues and there's all sorts of miracles and things like that, and the prophets have spoken to God, that sort of thing. And there's a whiff of unfairness in that, because they know for a fact that he exists because they've seen proof. We don't, so it's sort of unfair in that respect. But poor old Isaiah is told to go around in the buff and just do all this thing. I mean, it'd be difficult to take anyone seriously who turn up in your town talking about God's coming to do this, you must do this, if he's completely standing there in his birthday suit. So yeah, I think it's there's clearly a price to be paid for being one of God's chosen ones in that respect. I suppose we're all supposed to be God's chosen ones, aren't we? But chosen ones in the respect of having one of the jobs to do. They're not very dignified, and well, later on some horrible endings for lots of people as well for it. But yeah, so it's really interesting, this book of Isaiah. It's got these really odd leaps. It goes from one odd thing to another odd thing, and well, yeah, we'll see what's next.